Greetings. My name is Charlie Smith, and I'm the editor of the online media outlet Pancouver. Thank you for joining us for this panel discussion on bicultural identity and belonging. We're holding this event on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Hunkaminam Squamish speaking people. Since time immemorial, these nations celebrated their own unique culture and history. They retained relations with others through family, social life, traditions, protocols, and language. So you see, bicultural and identity and belonging is not something new to this land. We're here today to explore unique barriers that 1.5 and second generation Canadians face in navigating this duality. Bicultural identity and belonging is also at the heart of stories being showcased at this year's Advanced Theatre Festival. Ruby Slippers Theatre will present the Advanced Theatre Festival from January 26th to 30th at the Shadbolt Centre for the Arts in Burnaby. To further our understanding of bicultural identity, we're joined by four artists with lived experience and two community service professionals. Pedro Chamale is a Latinx Canadian theater artist born and raised in Chetwynd, BC. Pavan Gonzalez is Director of People and Culture at Mosaic. Ava Jung is a mixed-race Cantonese Chinese woman interested in the intersection between race and gender within media and the world at large. Fali Meva Manana, I hope I've got that right, Fali Meva Manana is a Malagasy Chinese-Canadian queer mixed-race creator from Coquitlam. Abby Padilla is a first-generation Filipino-Canadian actor, playwright, and filmmaker. And Tricia Trin is a queer, gender-fluid, interdisciplinary Chinese-Vietnamese-Canadian theater artist. I will ask a few questions, and then later we'll invite questions from the audience. You can go through the chat function, and please give the name of the person that you want to direct the question to. Ruby Slippers is presenting this event in association with Success, Mosaic, Pancouver, the Asian Canadian Special Events Association, and Rice and Beans Theatre. We gratefully acknowledge support from Canadian Heritage. Thanks to everyone for being here. Now, I'm going to start by asking the four artists a simple question. And I'll start with you, Abby. How do your cultural backgrounds, I can use the plural, influence or show up in your art?
Sure. Thank you so much. I am Abby Padilla. I am a first generation Filipino Canadian playwright actor, and I am also the producer of Sapin Sapin Filipino Festival Arts Festival, where I help first generation Filipinos write their first short play in their mother tongue, because the Philippines has more than 120 languages. In the Filipino community, family is a very big component. So whenever I create art, there's a lot of like that family component. There's a lot of melodrama. There's dark humor and campy humor.
That's wonderful. How about you, Pedro? How do your cultural backgrounds influence or show up in your art?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, as the artistic director of Rice and Beans and as a freelance artist, for a long time it didn't. I was afraid to be pigeonholed as a person of color and that being on the work. But then eventually, we embraced our cultural backgrounds and specifically started delving into like our own self-ethnographic histories. And so then it shows up in ways of exploring language and smashing that with our artistic aesthetics.
And can you give an example of a production that you're involved in or wrote or directed where that
Yeah,
was
totally.
manifested
Currently,
itself?
yeah, currently right now the is one of the most current ones I'm doing is my next play where I'm writing the story of my aunt who was on a list to be murdered and disappeared in Guatemala, and exploring how Spanish kind of evolved and changed through her emigration and that journey there.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. And how about you, Tricia? How do your cultural backgrounds influence or show up in your art?
Charlie, when I started my artistic journey, I was told that being an artist, specifically a performer at the time, was a selfish path, which can be a valid point considering I come from a family of accountants, electricians, lawyers, jobs that are dedicated to being in service. And so, why I've chosen an artistic path is because the majority of what I know about what it means to be a decent human, a decent sibling, child, friend, partner, is from fiction, plays, books, poems, dance, theater, the whole gamut. So, storytelling is really my way of, it's the way that I know how to give back to community and how to be in service and contribute to community. So this is why my practice is very much dedicated to investigating intercultural, sociopolitical influence on queer identity, gender identity, and diasporic identity. I'm very passionate about cross-pollinating social justice with storytelling, specifically creating multidisciplinary theater with feminist forward, gender nonconforming, and diasporic stories. I'm a second generation Chinese Vietnamese, and my family were amongst the refugees that fled by boat. And so this cultural background shows up in my art in many ways. Specifically, I can speak to language. An example is that I can draw from is from my play titled Attachments. It follows 6 queer characters from refugee and immigrant families, and they're navigating a polyamorous relationship. And in explorement of attachment theory, the lovers are double cast as their partner's parents, and it investigates many questions. How our first relationship with our parental figures bleeds into all our future relationships. What informs the discrepancy of lens between first generation and second generation, and is it possible to stay true to our identity while honoring our cultural traditions without repeating generational cycles of harm? It plays with language. In the middle of it, there are these 2 scenes. The daughters go home to have dinners with their fathers, and the sons and non-binary children go home to have dinner with their mothers. And each scene involves 3 separate dinner scenes happening simultaneously. There's simultaneous dialogue in Cantonese, Japanese, Spanish, Italian, and English. And that's all in hopes of exploring the struggles and privileges between class and culture, age and gender. And it's very much influenced by Cantonese. It was a prominent language in my household, and it's a tonal language. And this inspired the curiosity to explore simultaneous dialogue as a storytelling convention. Spread throughout the dinner scenes, the mothers and fathers, they have exact same lines, but in their mother tongue. And this is to explore the importance of tonal subtext and linguistic behavior when cross-examining cultural sociology. And in addition, the mothers and fathers also from different cultural backgrounds speak the same language, English, and what happens when that happens through their own tonal understanding of language.
Fascinating. It sounds like you've got a mini series there. And it's and how about you, Fally? How do your cultural backgrounds influence or show up in your art?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a writer specifically, like the way that I perceive any kind of storytelling is going to be from my own cultural experience of the world and from my own background. For me, particularly because I am triracial, I am African and Asian and European, I find that when I go into work, I want to make sure that there is a diverse amount of stories told, and I specifically am interested in representation without explanation. I find as a triracial person that often I can get pigeonholed into being one race instead of the other, because people don't totally understand that I can be all of those things at the same time. And that's part of also why I became a writer in the first place, was because I didn't want to pretend to be something that I wasn't. And no one else was going to write the ethnicity except for me. So I had to do it myself. And so when I write work, I want to make sure that I'm showcasing people from different backgrounds or showcasing myself, but that it's not about that specifically. Like I'm as a creator, super curious about having a story that's, a romance or a comedy, but that's not specifically about their ethnicity, or where the ethnicity is not like the issue of the story, where we can have chosen families that come from all kinds of different backgrounds. And I also find that because for so long, so many of the stories that I would hear as a person of mixed race about people who looked like me were so sad and tragic, and about the trauma and the difficulties that we would face just being humans in the world, that I wanted the opposite of that. I wanted to showcase the joy and the love and the care. And so my work specifically is comedy. I kind of only write comedy because I want to share that and know that we can't also have happy stories. And yeah, there can be some darkness in there too, but it's not just about the difficulties. That doesn't have to be the only stories that we tell.
And can you give an example where your kind of tricultural background might inform a work that you've done or are doing?
Uh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm doing a play right now called The Baking Show that Ruby Slippers is producing, which is great.
Well, this is your
Uh,
chance to promote it.
There we go. Here we go. We open February 5th. So if you want to come, it's happening. Yeah, and in that show it was really exciting to be able to write the lead character that I also have the honor of playing, who is what I am, who is part Chinese, part Malagasy, which is Madagascar, and then part British as well. So being able to put that in there is really fun for me. You know, I wanted her to talk about it, but it was nice to just kind of have it be a little blip that happens and then we don't talk about it for the rest of it because it doesn't matter for her story. It's not what the story's about. It's just a part of her. But yes, on some level, when she goes through the show, you know, she's really excited that she gets to make mantou in the story. She's a baker. She's really excited she gets to make mantou because she is Chinese, and so she was brought up eating that, you know, and so getting to have those little bits in there is really, really fun. And then I have a joke at the end where like the host thinks that she's Filipino, you know, because that's constantly what I would get all the time is that people think I'm Filipino, which is great. Love Filipinos. I'm just not. Yeah, so there's like a little taste of like something that I'm really excited to do. Or I have another show that I'm working on where I cast the mom as white because my mom is white, and that is often not something that we really get to see, I feel.
Well, that's wonderful. We also have two community service professionals on the panel who are also keenly interested in the arts. And I'm going to ask Ava Jung the first question for the community service professionals. What are the biggest misconceptions about people with a bicultural identity?
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. And, thank you so much for having me here. I'm very excited to be with all these other very esteemed peers. Um, and yeah, I think that's a really great question and one that I think about quite a lot, being biracial myself. And just to quickly, put in what I do, I work at Success as the community engagement officer, which is basically like their fancy uh, name for the volunteer coordinator. So I'm coming to this panel with that as like my profession, and then also my own experiences as a biracial person. So about misconceptions, I think one of the biggest ones that I've seen both like in my own life and then with other, multicultural or bicultural individuals is the idea of having to choose your culture or having to be more like one culture over another, or on the flip side, if they are very comfortably do feel one culture over another or kind of gravitate towards one, they are judged for that as well. So, being multicultural, being bicultural, it's a lot of people would say, and I do think it's true that, it's very lucky to have access to such, wonderful cultures in your life, but sometimes it doesn't necessarily like feel that way internally based on like these misconceptions. There tends to be a lot of gatekeeping, sometimes also from like the closest people in their life that are supposed to be comfortable and trusting, usually from your own family and friends, or also just the public as a whole. I find that a lot of bicultural people, or specifically in the biracial sense or multiracial sense, can sometimes be reduced to like percentages or fractions, and then people like take those numbers and then it makes them think, okay, well, that's how much you're allowed to be part of this culture or allowed to be part of that culture. And that can lead to like certain microaggressions that I think are common. We've heard a lot of phrases like, what even are you anyway? Who do you feel more like? Or, well, you don't seem this culture, or you don't look like this culture, which can sometimes then lead to a lot of people feeling they can decide for you, being like, well, you look like this one, so I think you're this, and stuff like that. And that can be really damaging to people with a bicultural identity, as a lot of the times it doesn't match like their internal feelings. It makes them feel powerless, like they have like no control over who they are or their own identity and how they're perceived. And so it can feel really demeaning as well. And I think we all kind of know that this level of like blood quantum thinking is a very colonial concept in its history. So I think it's important to understand through these misconceptions that bicultural people are allowed to choose, they're allowed not to choose, and that is valid. And it's okay. And like other people, they can just be and exist and be happy with themselves. And I think obviously, you know, if the intentions are pure, if someone feels like they do gravitate towards one over the other, not for any, you know, racist reasons, like one of my sides is so much more superior than the other, and etc., something like that. As long as like that's not the case, people should be able to self-identify, you know, being bicultural. Self-identification, especially in Canada, has been the norm for a really long time for monocultural or like individuals. It's like, you know, seen on census questions or demographic questions. Usually it's phrased in the sense of like, do you self-identify as Indigenous or do you self-identify as visible minority? This is very commonplace, but I haven't really seen that same grace applied for, you know, bicultural, multicultural people on a societal level. So that's sort of how I feel about those misconceptions.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me as I hear you speak of like Kamala Harris or Barack Obama, they'll say, well, they're half black. And I kind of think, no, they're black. And it's to marginalize a part of their identity based on being of mixed heritage is it's problematic. I'm wondering, Pavant, what you have to say when it comes to biggest misconceptions about people with a bicultural identity.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. Hi, everybody. Really happy to be on this panel. Pay Van Gonzalez, Director of People, Culture, and Inclusion at Mosaic. Outside of my job, I like to say, you know, I'm an artist as well, but we all got to eat. And so we got to, you know, we sometimes get into our careers that catapult us into areas that are slightly different than maybe our artist hearts would desire. But which I think, you know, very fitting to my story in terms of why I think, you know, a few of us, Trisha, you know, spoke to that a little bit as well in terms of these expectations that your families come with in terms of we've brought you here, you've survived, and now your expectation is to, you know, be a doctor, of course. So I think, you know, that of course impacts how we can engage with how we ourselves and see ourselves in our work. But as someone who's not biracial, I'm Persian. I'm ethnically Persian. I think it's really interesting how we can look at interculturalism with this question, especially within our own communities. So I'm a first generation refugee baby. My family came to Canada in the 80s, and I was born a couple of months after they landed. A couple of months prior, it would have been Greece. And what's really interesting when you kind of engage with the diaspora as you do here as a, you know, as a first generation Persian Iranian growing up here, you find this kind of intercultural dynamic with other Iranians who are not necessarily born in Canada, but have come here for, you know, let's say different reasons. So you kind of become this, you know, which culture do you actually belong to, and what does Canadian culture mean? And what does that umbrella of multiculturalism mean when you're struggling with your own identity within the diaspora itself? So it's this really interesting dynamic of, you know, navigating spaces within your own community, of trying to fit in that community while also trying to fit in this community. And so, you know, we say this thing in Spanish, no soy de aquí, no soy de allá. I'm not from here and I'm not from there. You know, this interesting space of, you know, this liminal space of trying to fit in both cultures. You know, and I think what's really interesting, you know, I think language is really important, right? And when we talk about multiculturalism, we're talking about cultures coexisting, right? While interculturalism literally emphasizes that active interaction, it's dialogue, it's integrating, it's actually becoming the in-between of talking to each other with what our cultures actually mean. It's understanding, it's promoting, it's finding those intersections together, which to me are very different things. It's being, you know, tangible, it's being literal about that interculturalism, as opposed to just making space. And how are we being intentional with that, right? So I think it's like a really interesting dynamic, and gives so much space for different perspectives. And I think to answer your question in terms of misconceptions is being homogenous about it all. right? I think Ava said it so well in terms of I have so many cultures, I have so many things that I belong to, listening already to what, everyone's already said. It's we can't homogenize these experiences. We can't just say because I'm biracial, bicultural, our experiences are the same, especially considering how independently unique our individual cultures are. So I think it's a beautiful question. It's a hard question, and I think it's something that a lot of us, have lived through in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Well, we all have a multiplicity of identities. There's everything. There's occupation, there's class, there's religion, sexual orientation. There's a whole long menu. Um, Now I'm going to ask the artists a question. I'll ask some of them. Have you ever felt the pressure? I'll ask you, Fali, this. Have you ever felt the pressure to choose one culture over another? You're a tricultural person, and if so, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely resonate with this question. I feel like I'm consistently asked to choose one culture over another. Um, when I began, so I started as an actor and I'm still an actor. I definitely felt like at first all of the only roles that were available to me were like open ethnicity roles. And then when I would get cast in them, they would just, if it was a family, whatever, they would just like pretend like, oh, it doesn't matter, whatever. We don't see color, all that stuff, And yeah, and then when I found that as there was like a push for more diversity, so like 2020, for example, it was wonderful to see so many more diverse stories come up and so many more auditions come up that were ethnic specific. But as a tricultural person, there wasn't really anything for me in that realm. It almost felt like the box that I had of auditions got even smaller because suddenly now they wanted a person who was Chinese, but I don't look Chinese enough. I don't look black enough, I don't look white, obviously. So suddenly it really did become just that open ethnicity box that I could go into, unfortunately, unless I wanted to pretend to be something that I wasn't, which I didn't feel comfortable doing. So I had that pressure, and it sucked. And so the way I responded to it was by becoming a writer and a producer and by creating my own work because that was really the only way I was going to be able to showcase that in the way that I wanted and create opportunities for myself that felt authentic. And obviously you do sometimes get parts that are wonderful and can be kind of open with ethnicity, but like especially in film, that wasn't really an opportunity. And so that was something that I claimed because I loved acting and I wanted to be able to do it, but I wanted to be able to do it in a way where I could still have, meaty, interesting roles that felt authentic.
I'm interested in your perspective, Pedro, as someone with Rice and Beans Theater, that you're dealing with theater from different cultural backgrounds, and whether your theater company has ever been, felt any pressure to choose one culture over another, or lean one way or another, or has it been relatively easy to navigate this? All the work you've done with Derek Chan and
Yeah, totally. No, thanks. I like the easy answer is like no, we haven't felt that because we haven't. But that's because we built the company. We were like Fale, like there wasn't places for us when we first came out for our work to be displayed, and so we just did it. And because we started building the company around our aesthetics, around our backgrounds, around our choices, and building the community and having folks approach us, it's folks who want to work with us. And because Derek and I both come from backgrounds of not just our cultural backgrounds, but politically and like musically, like I'm from punk rock and he's from heavy metal, and we come with this big F you attitude of like, I don't care what you think about me. I'm gonna do my thing. And if you don't like it, you don't have to listen. And I think that really helped because for me, I may be from my Guatemalan parents, but I was born and raised in the north of Canada, you know what I mean? And so I had to fit in a time when assimilation was huge. And so when I started connecting to a larger Latine um, culture base a lot, especially in the arts, when we think about who's able to, who come here as refugees and as immigrants, and then who gets to trickle down to be artists. Because let's face it, arts these days is a very privileged thing to do if you don't, have the means to do it or all those things and or the opportunities. Then who's in the arts, and so who can be second generation folks to do theater. And in the Latinx community, it's not many of us. And so I had to find a way to express that. So yeah, like there hasn't been pushback because maybe I'm not listening and that's not a good thing, but also maybe it is that I'm not hearing the haters that are asking me those things like, oh, or why are you telling this and not me? And I'm going, well, I'm telling a story of some brown people who grew up in the North and have this experience and have faced certain racist things or cultural things or being shunned by their own cultural, people. And so and I think people flock to the to rice and beans because we help to support them. And then moving forward with the artists we bring in, it's a delicate walk. That's the thing, is like that we trust the lead artists we bring in to be the experts. And if they're not the experts, then to bring those experts in to ask who needs to be in the room, who are those folks that are going to connect you to that. Because sometimes we're working with folks who are on a journey, reclaiming culture that's not their fault, that they were not born into, that's not, all those things. And so then we help to use all of the skills and resources that we have gained over the 15 years of being a company to and bring that to them so that they don't have to work as hard as we did to do the work, so they can go further than we did, faster than we ever did.
That's interesting. Now, Abby, um, somebody might look at you and say, okay, you're Filipino or Filipina, but you have a background, like you mentioned, the diversity within the Philippines, all the different languages, all the 7,000 or more islands, and different cultures, and your grandparents were from different cultural backgrounds. And then there's also the difference between being, somebody who came to Canada fully formed as an adult, grew up in the Philippines, and then there's this large population of Canadian-born people of Filipino ancestry, and then the 1.5 who might have come as children but went to Canadian schools. I'm wondering, when you look at this kind of Filipino culture in Vancouver, um, what you see in terms of the different layers and how they interact with one another.
Oh yes, definitely. It's very dynamic, I would say, because as Philippines is 7,000 plus islands, and it's almost like each region has its own culture and has its own language. So maybe I'll start first with like the first generation and second generation interactions. So with the first generation Filipinos, people who have grown in the Philippines and then migrated, even like the simple use of like pronouns, it's a little bit alien to us because all our pronouns are actually gender neutral. And then, being able to like interact with a second generation Canadian, Filipino Canadian who is very much into pronouns, there's already like sometimes that weird friction where sometimes the second generation would feel like, oh, you're being disrespectful towards me because you're not respecting my pronouns. But I think that we should actually also give each other some patience, because if you have grown up with the Tagalog language, we never really use like she or he. We're only thinking about like singular or plural. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, even within like the first generation Filipinos, of course, like for me, I'm someone who, even if my family is very like middle class, I grew up in in a particular area in the Philippines where there was a lot of slums, and there were like a lot of people in what some people would call the ghetto. So I know how to interact with these people, but then there are the socialite Filipinos who are like, oh, why do you talk that way? Or like, why are you so loud? Why are you so rambunctious when, certain people of a certain, social status in the Philippines are, the owners of malls or are millionaires or whatsoever. So I know that I have to like make certain adjustments, because whenever I'm trying to give like a particular message, and if the person that I'm talking to is someone from the slums, you need to come up with like kind of like very in your face kind of communication and humor. Whereas when I deal with people who didn't grow up in the slums, there needs to be like a certain subtlety or a certain poise, and all of it. So yeah, definitely different dynamics. Even with my maternal grandmother, who is from the northern region of the Philippines, very in your face, very loud, very rambunctious, while my paternal grandfather is from the middle region of the Philippines, so a little bit more passive aggressive and a little bit more gentle, but like the insult when it lands, it's like, ooh, I don't want to hear that. So yeah, definitely, like when I interact with like all different kinds of Filipinos here in Vancouver, it's almost like I always had to code switch depending on the person that I'm talking to.
It's interesting, Tricia. I'm wondering, as you've listened to Abby and Fali and Pedro, if you have any thoughts that you'd like to add in terms of um, your interactions. Like one of the things, people tend to stereotype, oh, if you're of Chinese ancestry, you're probably from Hong Kong or China or Taiwan. But there are actually a lot of people of Chinese ancestry who are from Vietnam, other parts of Southeast Asia, India, Peru, uh, you know,
Mm.
Brazil, all over the place, America, Australia. And I'm wondering, like, as you look at, there are many Chinese communities, but it's often defined in the media as like one Chinese community. And I'm wondering what you think, what you might have to say about interactions and your position as someone who has Chinese ancestry but is from Vietnam and where you fit within this kaleidoscope of people of Chinese ancestry.
Kaleidoscope, that's exactly the right word. First off, I want to say absolutely resonate, Abby, that passive aggressive, quiet, deep that you don't want to hear. Yeah, I mean, so my father is from the North Vietnam, Haiphong, and he was born and raised there. And my mom was born in China, and then her family went to Vietnam, but she identifies with being Vietnamese. So she's of Chinese blood, but she is fully Vietnamese, and my dad is fully Vietnamese. And they both speak Vietnamese, Mandarin, and Cantonese. And then they were amongst the refugees that fled by boat. And in our household, uh, it's when you talk about within your own culture how to navigate this in the different generations and all of it coming as a kaleidoscope. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely resonate with what Abby was saying. I mean, first with the Chinese, it's like if you speak Mandarin, you're of a certain descent. If you speak Cantonese, you're of a certain descent. There's a very different demeanor. There's very different ways of interacting and relating, and what is seen as acceptable and what's not. And then Vietnamese, it's like we're seen as the jungle Asian. So I've got both colonizer and colonized blood in me. It could class comes into play so much of all of that. It's just so layered. And so to say, oh, you're Chinese, and everybody groups you into the Chinese, or you're Vietnamese, even north to south of Vietnam, is very, very different. And yeah, yeah.
Interesting. I'll ask the service providers. I'll start with you, Ava. Um, and this is on a slightly different tack, but what are the biggest challenges in terms of meeting the needs of people with a bicultural identity in Canada?
Yeah, so that's a good question, kind of coming from somebody who works at success. And for anybody who isn't like completely familiar with what success is, we're kind of alongside Mosaic, actually, one of like the largest nonprofits, in BC and actually even just in Canada. We kind of specialize in settlement services, but over the past 50 plus years we've been around, we've kind of gotten involved with a variety of services that help like seniors, mental health, affordable housing, youth, all sorts of stuff. So we're kind of have our hands in a lot of jars now. So speaking from somebody who works at success with all these different services, we have a large breadth of clients that I find that many of them are on the aging side. So a lot of them tend to be older adults or seniors, at least especially in my department, that we support, and also with volunteers, who are retired and stuff like that. And I find those, and I think like some statistics back this up, that those with more prominent bicultural identity sometimes tend to be on like the younger side, maybe like older millennials, all the way to like our most recent generation of children who are being born now and stuff like that. So I think some of the challenges being a community service provider, is getting past kind of preconceived notions about what our services are and what we do. With success, like I said, we have a very long history in Vancouver. We were created in 1973, and our very first like initial sort of mantra or like vision was to support and bridge a gap for immigrants coming from Hong Kong in particular, as those was like a very large group coming in at that time, but they weren't getting the support they needed in Cantonese and all sorts of things. So that's the original reason why we were established. However, fast forward to now, a lot of time has passed, and we service anybody from anywhere in the world with any immigration status. And we still have new clients coming in today when we agree to help them, or like, oh, we have this and we can support you in this way. They're very surprised to hear that we can help them. And a lot of the times we have heard people say, oh, I thought you only serve Chinese people, which is obviously not true. It hasn't been true for like a really long time. But that notion has kind of seemed to still stick around even with 50 plus years. So I wouldn't be surprised that for every, one person who comes in and then tells us that thought, there is a very significant, probably shadow figure of people who have that thought and then like don't show up because of it. And so I wouldn't be surprised if this especially affected bicultural individuals who maybe think that we can't help them because, I don't know, they were born here, they're not ELL or ESL. They can, utilize technology, or even worse, kind of like what I was talking about earlier, maybe we wouldn't accept them or be like, well, this isn't for you, and reject them like that, even though we have lots of supports that could benefit them. So I kind of think as service providers, it's good to be proud of our history and maintain our history, but also kind of figure out a way to, connect with this group, as their problems, can be quite a bit different than when their parents, their grandparents, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the challenge on the bicultural individuals and is kind of feeling caught in the middle, not knowing who would or can support them, and on service providers, and to sort of understand these new sets of problems that, these people can have, and update messaging and services to kind of reach out and create like a comfortable environment that they can, approach. Kind of last thing to say about this is, specifically being the volunteer coordinator, is I find that actually, aside from, a large part being aging retirees as well as volunteers, then another large grouping are people who are bicultural, either from an immigration perspective or like an ethnic perspective. So for people who are like bicultural in an immigration perspective, like growing up maybe half their lives in one country and then coming here and establishing themselves here in Canadian culture, many of them say that they're volunteering because they want to like give back, saying success maybe had like helped them, settle and helped their family immigrate and access services and support, and they want to support us back, which is like, super, super sweet. And it's super fulfilled. That's how they feel fulfilled. And then additionally, people who are maybe biracial or multiracial and are like multicultural in that sense, they also volunteer quite frequently to sort of get more into their heritage and culture and feel more connected, which is also great. So I find that like if we keep providing these volunteer opportunities for these individuals to express themselves in this way and help them find that fulfillment, and it's also a really great way for them to meet others that are like them and get connected with others like them. I think that is like a right step in meeting needs, and maybe that is something that organizations, other nonprofits can kind of advertise for people with a bicultural identity.
Thank you very much for that, Ava. I just want to give a little shout out to the great leaders that Success has had over the years too. Like I'm old enough to remember Lillian Toe, who was amazing, Tung Chan, Maggie Yip, and I think they all had this broader vision that they wanted to help the broader community, and so that's why people may have these misconceptions about Success, but it is an organization that really does reach out to many groups. And Mosaic's also had some great leaders over the years. I used to work with Joan Anderson, who worked there. She was amazing, and Vera Radio, and so I'm wondering, from your perspective, Pavan, what are the biggest challenges that you see in terms of meeting the needs of people with bicultural identity in Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, similar to Ava, I mean, that's Mosaic's mandate, is ensuring that we're providing that holistic support from every angle for folks in their newcomer journey. And we service over 33,000 folks a year. So that for us in different capacities, whether that's language support, family support, integration support, all the stuff that you need, whether that's everything that you need to really kind of navigate your journey as coming to Canada. And I think that's how we operate in Mosaic, is so that folks can come in with any identity. And say, how do I kind of navigate this journey? And I can kind of speak to it from a little bit of a different perspective, because I think, at Mosaic, they've been so established for so many years that folks can kind of just walk in the door and say help, right? But I think what's really interesting from that bicultural perspective is the pressure on newcomers to understand the sandbox and to assimilate, for lack of a better term. And they're coming from a multitude of their own cultures or one specific culture, and now being told you must now have a biculture with Canada, and you must absolutely understand what this means. And that can be a really jarring experience for newcomers in general. And I think, at Mosaic, how we kind of talk about it is, we're not having you stand on, the edge of the sandbox, for lack of a better metaphor. It's, this is what the sand is made of. This is how we play here. This is what these toys look like. It's actually navigating the space through those intersections to make that a part of their culture as well, as opposed to this is what you must learn. And I think what's really interesting, when you're a newcomer or you're in a settlement space and you're helping, newcomers from the perspective of, the director of people, culture, and inclusion, my responsibility, and my team's responsibility is to ensure that the folks that are providing that work are appropriately trained, that are able to speak to folks in a way that gives space for that, the multitudes of culture and identity. Like the I Belong program is a really good example of that at Mosaic, where it's, it's the helping all folks in terms of the LGBTQIA plus community and being able to provide through that intersection, in that safe space through settlement. And I think that, ensuring that we have the language as settlement workers, I'd like to expand that, like as an artist myself, what language are we using in all of our spaces to make it accessible and to make that safe? So I think, from that perspective, it's a really interesting weight on folks that are, coming to a new country. And there's a lot of pressure, like in terms of how they apply for work. There's a lot of folks who ask me, should I have an English name when I apply for work in Canada? And it's a really interesting conversation. It's a lot deeper than folks think. Even myself, as someone who was born in Canada, for a lot of years, I had an English name. I wouldn't get callbacks. It wouldn't happen, right? And there was a time, I use it as an example in my HR training all the time. There was a time for like 6 months, I didn't get any callbacks. Changed my name, applied to the same jobs. I got callbacks from every single one. So you have to ask yourself, what is the weight of how I see myself? Do you want to work someplace like that anyways? That's a lesson I learned many years later, right? And then, what does standing in your excellence look like, right? And then what responsibility do we have in those spaces to provide that bridge so that folks can thrive, as opposed to, checking a box of I'm here now and I fit this culture and I'll privately be my culture at home. When really it should be that intercultural piece. That's how can I see your culture? Because I want to taste that too. I want to be that there with you. It should be a safe thing for that to do together. So
That's very interesting. Now I'll go back to the art now, and I'll ask you a question, Tricia. How does your art help you explore or express your identity?
Your full transparency, it didn't always. I think I think Pedro also hit this earlier, is that I came up in the education system between like 1994 to 2011, and which is not that long ago, but the politics and best practices in rooms feel worlds apart. And throughout that time, I experienced professors and directors say things to me like, you'll be fine in the industry because you look like them, but you sound like us. And, Charlie, I was so deeply conditioned to believe the industry had no room for someone like me, and at least rooms with authentic stories. We would sidekick, the comic relief, the token character with no lines, and stuff like that. And I had bought into the idea of assimilation as the only way for survival, the only way to succeed in this industry. So much so that I was relieved when that professor said that to me, when I should have been enraged, and talk about internalized shame, internalized racism, internalized many, many things. It was a different time. And I was entering the professional world between 2010 and 16, and I was still discovering my own identity in terms of queerness and gender, and felt incredibly estranged from my diasporic identity, all while jumping into an industry that someone else mentioned earlier is very heavily rooted in Eurocentric frameworks, colonial systems, and oppressive approaches. It wasn't good for my mental health, and everything I was auditioning for or casted as didn't reflect an identity that I recognized as true. And the politics of the casting room became an obstacle in my own self-discovery, my personal journey of finding what felt true to me. And so that's kind of, in resonance with Fally, is that's when I committed to like a professional pivot, and from performance to more playwriting and directing, with the same goals and aspirations of creating spaces and opportunities and stories that reflect underserved stories, with in hopes a little authenticity and sensitivity, stories that are affirming, that resonate, and that are hopefully meaningful, that can offer perspective to hopefully encourage understanding across identities. So now, throughout that journey, art is my way of reclaiming my identity. I think it'll be a lifelong practice, but that reclamation kind of happens through, as a playwright specifically, I get the opportunity to build worlds and characters and scenarios, and dialogue on identity, especially in intergenerational family dynamics, and intercultural dynamics. And it really, really, I find it such a wonderful, wonderful, privileged opportunity to get to create fictional conversations, scenarios, moments, that many folks in reality may not have access to for many reasons. Stories that hopefully can offer moments of closure or belonging or understanding, or maybe even change. And yeah, it's a to me right now, I feel like it's a very hopeful time, because I see a lot of amazing creatives that are creating work that speaks to the everyday experiences of intersectional identity. And I feel like the more we do that, the more dialogue can be sparked, and hopefully that translates from the stage to outside the theater, and
Hey,
within cultures and across cultures.
thank you. As you were speaking, I also wondered, Pedro, because you're also, writing, directing, whether what Trisha says echoes with you.
Yeah, it certainly does. I mean, it's I think a very similar thing. Those of us that begin writing or creating or devising together with a hunger to see people who look and sound like us. I mean, for me, we kind of grew up, went through school systems, Trisha, I think around the same time, not to date ourselves, but um, you know, when I was going through that school, similar things to you, but also like there were moments of like, getting every time I, would talk about myself and my experience, teachers being like, "Oh, well, have you read Guillermo Verdecchia's Fronteras Americanas?" And like that's all they ever knew. And like, "Oh, you're so him." And I'm like, "Well, not really. Like he's an immigrant and I'm not, and like a journalist and all these things and all the multitudes of why we're similar. Yes, we're both Latinos, like I get it, but also like it's a very different experience. And so like with Peace Country, part of that was writing um, roles that I never ever felt like I've never felt truly seen, even by most Latinx work, because Latinx published work in this country are by immigrants and refugees, and that's not my experience. And so,
Maybe you
like,
can
when
just
I,
elaborate what Peace Country was about, because it is very
oh, yeah,
interesting.
oh, for sure. So, Peace Country was my play that married both like my environmental activist self and um, kind of the history of growing up in Chetwynd, British Columbia, and with a group of friends, of intercultural friends, two Latina sisters, and like their indigenous friend, and the white Euro settler, and the son of the Chinese food restaurant, like very much my experience, like the what I grew up with in Chetwynd. And so like when I was writing those sisters, especially specifically Julia. I wrote from the voice of a second generation person, and wrote a monologue that was like something that, although yes, it's from a femme perspective and all those things, but that I just haven't experienced in reading published Latinx work, and so from a Canadian perspective too. And so yeah, that was my goal. So that hopefully maybe if someone's ever looking for a monologue like I did, and why I didn't go out and audition, just I it's so hard for me to find monologues to connect with, that maybe someone will be able to find it. In the thought, I was like, if this ever got published, which thankfully it did, but like, not because I knew it was going to be published. I was like, if this did happen to, or if someone's like, you got something, they could come across it and find something. Someone like me, a second generation, would be like, oh yeah, that's it. There we go. There's a little bit more of myself being seen.
And Abby, you're blazing your own path in theater, um, quite different than many other writers, uh, playwrights with Filipino ancestry. I'm wondering how your art helps explore or express your identity.
Yes, for sure. Well, the way I tackle it is that how I act or how I respond to certain things is definitely influenced by how my parents and my grandparents act. And then when I also try to analyze why they act this way, is it's because of their experience while they were growing up. So when I was doing Grandma Gangsta Gorilla, I one of the things that that was playing in my mind is like, oh, why do I feel like my grandmother is so secretive? Like I ask her certain things like, hey, when you were a kid, what was like your favorite toy, or what was the thing that you loved doing? And then she would answer like, oh, I had no time to play. I would just be like going to school and then working in the fields, and then the Japanese came, and then that's it. Like she would not say anything else about her childhood. And then I'm like, but yeah, I'm pretty sure, Grandma, that more than just what you experience, there are a bunch of other things that you like. But she's like, I don't think I have any choice. Like my mind was just really more survival. So, just hearing stories like that made me feel like, oh, I get it, and I want to honor that experience. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that I do have a choice to, live my life beyond just the survival. And then I think like one of the interesting things that I've had a conversation with a Filipino actor that I was working with is that she was saying that every time she would invite her auntie to a play that she's in, her auntie just like falls asleep and she really has no clue what's going on in the play. But then I when I casted her in Grandma Gangsta Gorilla, where there's a lot of like Filipino references and everything is like so quick pace and like so witty and dark humor, she was like, my auntie was just like, she was glued. She was on the edge of her seat from like beginning to end because she understood everything. So, like being able to hear stories like that, where it's like, oh, this was a person who wasn't like a theater goer before, but she found something that she really resonated with. Like that actually really warms my heart as an artist, because even when I first came to Canada, I was just like, okay, plays are interesting, but I don't know, I couldn't understand what it was that was missing for me, until I realized, I'm like, oh, because I actually don't see myself in these stories. I don't see myself in these characters, even like the way they sing. That's not how like a Filipino singer would sound like. So yeah, it's been a very fun journey for sure.
And Fali, as you listen to the other speakers, Pedro, Tricia, Abby, is there anything you'd like to add or anything go through your mind?
Yeah, I mean, they all, resonate with me. I'm so grateful to be able to be an artist and be able to have my art help me kind of explore and help me figure out who I am, and also showcase, kind of like Abby was saying, like stories that you might not have heard before, or perspectives that you might not have heard before. I think that's one of the most wonderful things, and I think it's why a lot of us do this, is because we have these, again, stories that aren't really told very frequently. I think I've talked a little bit about how I feel like my art has kind of helped me express my identity and helped me feel more authentic in the characters that I get to play. And I think one thing that's really wonderful is through this writing, I do become more curious about my background. When you become a writer, you get really interested in stories, and so being able to get excited about writing a story with someone who has my background, or writing a story specifically that is Malagasy, like that's something I'm wanting to do next. Is I want to write a story that has more Malagasy characters, because no one really knows about Madagascar. That kind of like Pedro was saying, no one really knows about Madagascar unless except for the animated movie, and it's not very accurate. I will tell you that. It's got lemurs, but otherwise it's not very accurate. So being able to be excited about that, to be excited about showing these people this culture and this island and this wonderful language, the Malagasy language that people maybe don't know about at all, I think is really cool. And obviously for myself, being able to do it in like a comedic, wonderful, joyful way that we haven't really seen before.
And in the arts community, I'll go back to you this time, Pavon. Some organizations, and I think Ruby Slippers Theater is a prime example, are embracing interculturalism. They're fostering cross-cultural connections and understanding. Traditionally, we had this kind of official multiculturalism brought in by the Trudeau government. I'm wondering what your thoughts are when it comes to multiculturalism versus interculturalism, and what the differences are, and what people should think about when they hear these terms.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I actually be sneaky and say something about the last question in this?
Of course you can.
Yeah, I just love as someone it's an honor to be on this panel as someone who's a closeted artist, a closeted artist, really, right? I wanted to talk a little bit about that piece of the mask that you have to wear in the world. And I think that for me, being able to write and do the work that I do from my 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. before I go to work allows me to be truly authentic with my culture and my background. It allows me to speak in a way that I can't speak in certain circumstance as an executive, or in certain spaces, not necessarily Mosaic. Mosaic's this wonderful organization, but a career of almost 20 years in HR. As a marginalized woman, you have to wear a mask if you want to survive in those spaces, right? And if you're someone who is intrinsically artistic and who wants to speak about things in a certain way, you have to do that, outside of those spaces. And I think the world is changing a lot. And since the 20 years that I started this work, I think, the fact that we have DEI and EDI and all of these things, when I started that work, that we didn't use that word. It was, affirmative action and all these other things, right? So it's just really interesting that, we're in this place now where, one, I think our culture is able to come out more to the forefront in our workplaces, but we don't have to hide our art as much anymore. And so, being a part of this panel, the duality of me kind of, being an artist after work while also kind of engaging in this work at work, to me is an honor. And, I think for all those folks listening or other folks who are kind of in that space of two, these artists are such a good example of, following, that path and sticking to that. And that both things are beautiful. And I just wanted to say that. I think it was impactful for me. Okay.
Interesting.
But your question about multiculturalism and interculturalism, yeah, I spoke to that a little bit earlier. I think those are like very different things. I think multiculturalism is the idea of us like coexisting in one space, and then focusing on that that group identity and that that preservation of like the mosaic, not the organization, the word. While I think interculturalism really is it's an active word. It's interaction, it's dialogue, it's understanding, it's integration. Between cultures, it's building that shared understanding, it's promoting that social cohesion. And I think my name's Payvan Gonzalez. I think that's a good. I'm Persian. My husband's Salvadorian. He speaks Farsi. I speak Spanish. He cooks Persian food now. I can make a really good pupusa. I think that these are the things that are active pieces of that intercultural, existence. And I think, just making space for that is, the first piece in that kind of puzzle. And I think there's a lot of, work for that. Because I think a lot of, if we're looking at it in like the professional space, there's a lot of performative action that comes with this kind of stuff, right? Oh, look at how multicultural we are. But how are we actually engaging in this space with our multicultural folks? What does that actually mean? And then within our communities, what does that mean, right? Like, what does that mean for us to share within our cultures? I think, as an Iranian with a husband from El Salvador, there's been a lot of really interesting intercultural conversations on how we show up for each other, and how we kind of engage in our different cultures together. He can make a beautiful half scene for Persian New Year, and we do an ofrenda every year too for Day of the Dead, right? So we live that intercultural life together, and it's really beautiful. And I think that making space for that visibility and then living in that every day together, for us makes that difference. But I think being intentional about the language is important. So yes, I think, intercultural and multiculturalism not interchangeable. And I think if we're talking about folks coming together and actually making space for intersectionality and work together, then we're talking about interculturalism.
And in the next little while, just for the attendees, I'm going to encourage you to write questions. I'll still be asking questions of the panelists, but you can think about writing questions, think of questions who you might want to direct the questions to. But it's your turn, Ava, to speak. I haven't asked you a question in a little while. Um, I'm wondering what you think could be done to for the funding bodies, the lenses that they should be looking at, and I'm thinking Canada Council or uh, Creative BC. There's no shortage of them. Everything from Knowledge Network to the NFB, National Film Board. What lenses they should be thinking about when it comes to bicultural identity and belonging, when they're making decisions about projects and applicants for public funding.
Yeah, for sure. So I think kind of the first thing that comes to mind with what's our lens or how they should look at it is first and foremost, I think just to make sure that when they approve projects or seeing like who the applicants are, that they don't just like check boxes, so to speak. So like let's say, someone with a bicultural or a multicultural identity, applies for their grants for a film or a project about their experience and it gets approved and all that. It's very easy, for maybe people from these bodies. I'm not saying they do this, but just to keep in mind, it's very easy for people possibly from these bodies to be like, okay, great, all right, we got this one. Don't need another thing from this area. Time to move on to the next thing. We got that representation like covered, which is just like not accurate or true or right. Just with this panel and seeing all the different people we have here, my fellow panelists, experiences just vary so greatly from person to person. Someone with a bicultural identity, let's say, being mixed Indigenous and Asian would be very different from someone like me, being mixed white and Asian, or someone who grew up, let's say, on like the immigration type of bicultural definition, like someone who grew up in the Middle East, per se, moving to Canada versus someone from Africa moving to Canada, or someone who is bicultural, who is part of the LGBTQ2S plus community versus somebody who's not, right? All these facets can really affect someone's viewing of the world, how they interact with the world, and form their experiences, which are then extremely unique to them, which are also valid and should, be platformed through films and projects. And just because one story is told doesn't mean the entire picture is being told. And kind of taking that from working at Success, even if someone, let's say like two clients have the exact same, immigration background or the exact same ethnic background, I have never encountered two clients whose story are the same. It's like everything, each and every individual is just so unique in their experiences. It's just, that diverse. So, just for these places to keep that in mind, and I guess like kind of in a shorter sense, keep that intersectional lens when looking at these different projects. Because, again, like I said, just, me being Chinese, and then my other panelists who also have Chinese heritage, we probably all haven't experienced being Chinese the same way, but we can all identify, as being Chinese people, but we all have different experiences, things to say. So kind of just to keep, I think those in mind are really important.
And one of the things when I was talking about questions earlier, I should have been a little more specific. There's a Q&A section at the bottom in the row. So if you do have a question and you want to ask any of the panelists, you click the Q&A at the bottom and then type it in, and then we'll get to them before the end of the panel. So now I'm going to go back to the artists. Tricia, I'll go to you, and I'll ask, how does your art, or maybe I'll ask this, what does belonging mean to you personally, as opposed to socially or nationally?
I just want to say that Pavan, I really resonated with what you said in regards to interculturalism, and I think some of that translates to my personal definition of belonging. To me, belonging personally translates to care. And to me, it's so much of what it means to care for and to be cared for shows up as consideration, to consider and be considered. And that's a best practice that I try, I aim to carry into the creation rooms is how do we create and build and hold space as artists, directors, producers, leaders in any given room. It comes down to consideration of who is in the room on the daily basis, taking the time to learn and understand what makes up their identity and in turn their reality as an act of care. Learning their cultural backgrounds, their creation backgrounds, their access needs, to understand what they're walking in the room with, understand their communication style, understand how they receive feedback. All of that is an act of care, and that hopefully fosters a sense of belonging. At least it does for me. And I can speak a little bit more of my journey with belonging. It was very hyper focused on searching for spaces that had room for me. And as time passed, it became very clear that belonging involves both, maybe this is very obvious to people, but for me personally, that involves both external and internal spaces that have room for us, but also how do we show up with all of ourselves. And so much of that is influenced by my upbringing. Growing up, I was taught that I can only exist in spaces when I am centered. And when I'm dysregulated or if very, very loud emotions are prevalent, I had to go away and collect myself and come back centered. And that did me a huge disservice, as I'm unlearning all of this and meeting myself in wholeness. I'm allowing myself to be seen more and more in the room. And I really discovered that to care is actually quite easy. To be cared for and to receive care is actually a hard part. And that it takes strength to be soft, normalize soft. We want soft. And when it comes to belonging, I'm discovering I get as much as I can give of myself, and it goes hand in hand. And so, yes, safe spaces show up and also the courage to show up with my whole self in all of those intersections. I really believe it takes immense amount of courage to show up with all of us. And I came up in a generation where it was very much conditioned to please the room and prioritize the comfort of the room and avoid conflict and don't cause a scene. But now I really believe that change can be advocated for with a gentle hand. Change can be a collaborative process if the system, the room, and also we ourselves pivot our relationship with conflicts. I aim to approach conflict as an opportunity to learn how to be better for and with each other. And that dissonance causes friction. Yes, when we don't agree, it's often because we don't understand. And that is where belonging begins to maybe shatter. But if we see dissonance as a way to strengthen belonging, what could happen?
That's wonderful. That's a very tough act to follow for the next person. Very deep. I'll ask you, Fali, what does belonging mean to you?
Oh gosh. Yeah, how do I follow up? That was great. What does belonging mean to me personally? I think it means a place where I can feel safe and seen, a place where I feel accepted as who I am and not what I am, is very important. I feel very lucky right now. I'm in a rehearsal hall with a very incredible team, and I feel extremely seen. I love what Trisha said about like softness and not being afraid of that softness. I feel part of why it works so well is that I can be vulnerable in that room. You know, we can all kind of say like, oh, we're having a bad day, or our body's hurt, or we're struggling with this thing, you know, and being able to be cared for and be held in that is so special. And I think creates such a warmth and a wonderful place to do and create art. I feel like it's the only place where you really want to be creating art from is something like that. So yeah, I think it means a place that you, for me anyways, in this specific moment, a place that you feel safe, where you can be vulnerable and you can be mad and you can have those difficult conversations and still know that at the end of the day, you're on the same team and that you care for each other, and that talking about those things and going through this process together makes it even stronger.
And Pavand, you are working with a lot of people who are trying to find belonging when they show up at Mosaic. So I'm curious what you goes through your mind when you're asked what belonging means to you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think, I think Fally said it beautifully. And I think that, safety, knowing that you can be your true self, I think in the context of, Mosaic and folks coming in looking for that, it's community and knowing that they can rely on folks and being able to, I think, share in folks that are going through that same lived experience. So, the events that, we are able to engage with for, our clients and our newcomers that are coming, and being able to create that space and that organic opportunity for folks to also, find each other is really important. But I think, yeah, it's a really good question. And I think, belonging, is not, it's not organic. I don't think it is. I think it's built. I think it's created. I think it's shared. Similarly to the, where folks say grass is always greener on the other side, I believe the grass is greener where you water it. And I think that if you're gonna, build community and create that belonging, you need to engage in that work yourself. And so, being that example is really important in any space that you're in, whether it's in your office, whether it's in your executive room, or whether it's at home while you're, creating that community on the paper, or in whatever form of art you're doing that. It's being intentional about creating that space. And understanding, as so many people have already said, that it's different for all of us. And making that space is different. And I think, something that I think, really encompasses that for me is, and I think that speaks to, I think what you're asking too, in terms of like providing opportunity. It's not about making a seat at the table. It's about creating a table with us in mind. And that's the difference, right? It's not about just saying, I've made a temporary opportunity for you to just kind of experience this. I've made a table for you to exist in all of your fullness and all of your humanity and all of who you are. So I think, yeah, it takes a lot of intentional work to do that.
That's very profound about the table. Thank you. Now, I'm going to read one of the questions from one of the attendees. I don't know if the person wants to be identified or not, so will keep them anonymous. But this person was prompted by Trisha's comment about intergenerational dynamics. And this oftentimes in stories, when intergenerational divisions are explored, we tend to see a resolution in which understanding between generations is achieved. But achieving understanding between people, it is deeply encouraging and uplifting, and art is a great way to bridge gaps between people. But at the same time, there are situations in which resolution between generations may not be possible, either due to death or abuse or other causes. And I'll ask Abby this question. How do you see stories still providing pathways for hope in light of this?
Yes. Thank you so much for that person who gave that question. But I really want to recommend. There is this book that I read, I think last year. It's called "It Didn't Start with You," and it's by Mark Wallen. So essentially, he was talking about certain things that we have inherited from our grandparents or parents, like their own anxieties, or like their own diseases, or like their irrational fears and all that. And one of the things that really resonated with me is that first you really have to recognize that maybe first of all these things aren't really yours to carry, it is your own grandparents and your parents' lived experiences, and definitely it has helped shape the way you have lived because of that. But there just really comes a point where you just say, thank you so much for all the lessons. Thank you so much for trying to keep me alive. Thank you so much for all your sacrifices, your blood, sweat, and tears to help me get where I am right now. But now I'm going to take myself higher because of the baton that you have passed on to me. I'm going to make the future much better for the next generation. So that book was really inspiring for me. And even just for me, I think like my personal experience, when I was a kid, I really wanted to go into martial arts. But because my dad grew up in a time where they didn't have money at all to like all do all these extracurricular stuff, he was always saying like, no, we're not spending money on sports. The only way that you're gonna get through university is if you have really good grades. So I want you to focus on your academics. And that's what I did. But eventually, as I grew up, it was really making my spirit mourn a lot. So when I turned like in my 30s, that's the time I actually went into taekwondo and karate and like all these are arnis. And then I made a play where I can use martial arts. So you know, I think my second point is also redeeming certain experiences that your parents might have thought like it's a bad experience, but now if it's something that really makes you happy, redeem that experience. And there's hope in that. Yeah. Hope that helps.
That's wonderful. Now I'm going to go to a second question. This I'm going to direct it at Pedro. What excites you most about the next generation of bicultural artists emerging? And how do you hope they'll reshape Vancouver's theater landscape? And this is with much love from a bicultural Filipino Peruvian creative hoping to make positive waves in the industry.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much that excites me about the next generation of bicultural artists because they're doing it so fearlessly that like so much more than I was so scared to be me because of fear of rejection, all those things, and then having to work at it. And I think uh Piven, your comment about the grass is greener where you water it was just like, oh yeah, maybe a lot of those situations were self-made. I was just being like, no, it's like with my own insecurities that made those experiences worse. And I think these next generations, they're being fearless and just doing their show and not worrying about what audience they're playing to. They'll find their audience. Their community will come. And that excites me so much. And they're finding each other and they're creating in spite of the pressures that are dragging us down or like spaces disappearing. And I feel like it's my job as an artist who's into his mid-career now, as I have to say, to fight to ensure that like with the privilege that I have that we can try to keep cultural spaces open or organizations that provide that are getting the funding, make sure that those voices are being heard and or to funnel the funding even to folks like that of like I have direct access to funding. How much of my funding can I get to artists to do what they want to do without the pressures of having to administrate a company? How can we do that? And so I think it excites me to see them being just coming out with the energy and the fearlessness to be their whole selves on stage.
That's wonderful. And Fali, you're, I think this question was partially toward your generation, so I'll ask you, what excites you about the next generation of bicultural artists emerging?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like Pedro was saying, I think that there was so much work done before. So many people that really had to fight to be heard, even a little bit. And so I feel like there is starting to be more space being made for bicultural folks. Even conversations like this, that 10 years ago, maybe this might not have even been a conversation or a webinar or a panel. It might have even been the thought that people had in their heads, So being able to do stuff like this and talk about it and have work that is interesting and multicultural and that's supported and that people actually want to hear from, I think is so special. Yeah, I feel like Patrick said it so well. So there you go.
Okay, wonderful. Now we're coming near the end. We still have a little bit more time, but I'm going to go through the entire panel now and ask for any closing comments or closing thoughts, or maybe this is something I ask in interviews. I say, well, what is it that maybe I neglected to ask that you wanted to say? And I'll start with you, Ava. Are there any points you'd like to make or any conclusions that you've drawn from what you've heard?
I'm speechless. It's just,
Okay.
yeah, there's just um it's just to hear, from so many people about all their different breadth of experiences and how their art informs them. As someone like kind of similar to a Paven, like I consider myself an artist, just not my profession. It's just something that I'm very passionate about. It's just been very inspiring me to hear from so many of you and be part of that and see that, also like very seen, and connect with you all about how, I grew up thinking about my art, and when I would draw or like make my stories or do anything, it was always like very much the world like how I wanted to make it. And, and to have that creativity and to go to those places, it just makes me feel very, connected to you all, to hear how you guys all really also took it and just ran away with it, and you're just using it to keep paving that way and making those waves. So yeah, thank you for all that you do, and for how much you're contributing to this arts community, being multicultural, bicultural. So yeah, thank you.
And Abby, what are some thoughts that you have based on what you've heard that you haven't expressed yet?
Okay, yeah, I think in terms of like interculturalism and multiculturalism, um, with interculturalism, and this is like my own thing that I really want to continue with my artistic practice, is having collaborators of different cultures. Because I feel like there's a tendency that I get it, like, oh, let's make a play about the Filipino people and all that. But like, how do Filipinos actually interact with the white people here? Or how do, like in my play, like how do we Filipinos actually try to process living with the Japanese, who also had like their own stories, like during the World War II, and how do we actually reconcile that? And in like one of my early plays that I did, called The Banyan Tree, I actually collaborated with a Vietnamese artist, and us just talking about like our own, like, oh, what's the mythology in Vietnam versus the mythology in the Philippines, and how do we like make something that's like Asian Canadian, and where we can, originate like our own kind of mythology. I feel like it's so interesting that even me as like a theater goer, if I hear like a project like that, where it's a lot of interaction of different diaspora in Vancouver, like that is a show that I would actually want to watch. So I mean, for Peace Country, like that's actually one of the things that I really appreciated, because like I see all the interactions of like all these different characters from different backgrounds, and that is like a very good representation of the people that we have in Canada. So yeah.
Yeah, that's Vancouver. And how about you, Fali? Is anything that you'd like to say that you haven't had a chance to say so far?
Uh, I can't think of anything. I mean, like, rack my brain. Yeah.
That's okay.
I think that this conversation has really opened my eyes to so many different perspectives, especially, as I think Ava was saying, like we're all multicultural, but multicultural in so many different ways. And I'm really excited to see what happens and to see how those projects grow and get to all kind of, work together at the same time. It's gonna be really, really cool.
And Tricia,
There's a button.
Tricia,
Hello. Yeah.
anything you'd like to say that you haven't had a chance to say so far?
Honestly, I just want to say thank you to Ruby Sippers and the panelists. It's been so wonderful, and you, Charlie and Christy, to, like Fally said, even 8, 10 years ago, this may not have even happened. So this is very, very, just fills me with hope and joy and resilience, and all the things that we should be celebrating. And I learned actually so much hearing from you, Ava, and you, Pavan, and of course, my fellow artists here. It's so wonderful to get into a room and just jam and speak about it as it is. And yeah, thank you.
Well, I guess this is breaking down silos. That's what we're trying to do here. How about you, Pedro? What what are some things that are going through your mind based on what you've heard so far?
Yeah, I mean, echoing all the thanks and all the wonderful things I've heard. There's many quotes and now a book I'm going to read now because of this panel, and been brought to near tears many times. But I think one thing too, like thinking about our belonging and creating belonging or all that stuff, and that I've always said been searching for a place to belong, and part of the reason why I think theater is a place where I gather and look to find my community is because I haven't had that belonging, and I've been trying to create that my entire life, and um but in that process, we can also be frozen with fears of getting it wrong, and that it's okay to take those steps and to be mindful, and that can I'm just gonna finish what I'm saying, and then I'll change it for you. Yeah, and 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 that you do it with care, and to quote one of my favorite quotes by Maya Angelou is, you do your best until you know better, and then you do better. And that's our job. Just because we are people here who have created these spaces doesn't mean we can't cause harm, and that we can't have things happen. But once you know it, do better. And I think that's one of those things in belonging. It can happen, and but don't be afraid just because you might make mistakes.
Well, I think your work and Rice and Beans has done a tremendous job in advancing that sense of belonging in Vancouver. So I want to thank you for that, Pedro. And how about you, Payvand? What's going through your mind as we draw to a close here?
Yeah, honestly, can't echo anything more than what's already been said. It's been an honor to be on this panel. And I think I don't want to speak for Ava, but I think as two professionals that are doing our art on the side, I think for me this was really inspiring. And what Pedro said in terms of like the younger generations and newer generations just owning space for me is healing in ways that I didn't anticipate, and I think that it's a reminder for me to do the work too. It's a reminder for me to take up that space and to do that art, do the art, especially when the world's on fire. That's when it counts the most. And I think that I'll be walking away with that today to make sure that I'm doing that more. And I think that, I think art is such a unifying language across cultures. And so much of that we apply in the work that we do with even, within Mosaic. And so it was a good bridge for me to in reminder of how important this work is across the board and how much we can add to the world in a really beautiful way. So, to all the artists on this panel, y'all are doing some really, really wonderful things and contributing to the world when everyone is telling us not to. So the honor really, I hope you all feel that. And Ava and I are looking forward to contributing ASAP.
Thank you. I've always thought that art actually is underappreciated in terms of how it counters bigotry, and that us and them thinking, the work that you're doing, and it's almost, if I can get a little political, a weapon against Trumpism and that xenophobia that sadly is coming to the forefront more prominently right now, to a lot of people's horror. But with that, I think I'll close. I'll just say I really want to thank all the panelists for sharing your thoughts today. You were all great. Pedro, Pavand, Ava, Fali, Abi, Patricia, you're a credit to the community, and you're really helping enlighten us and speak to our hearts too. And it's a wonderful thing. So I hope everyone here will check out their work and their organizations for the ones who are with the organizations. I also want to thank Ruby Slippers Theater for presenting this event. The folks at Ruby Slippers did this in association with Success, Mosaic, Pancouver, the Asian Canadian Special Events Association, and Rice and Beans Theater. We all appreciate the support from Canadian Heritage. We also appreciate the attendees who submitted questions and those who didn't submit questions. And I hope you'll share this video once it's up on YouTube so these profound words from our panelists can reach a larger audience. And I also hope, in closing, that you'll all consider attending this year's Advanced Theatre Festival, which runs from January 26th to 30th at the Shadbolt Center for the Arts. Until then, take care.